An elitist pianist challenges a simple woman to a piano duel, completely unaware she's a musical genius. When everyone expects her to fail, she sits at the grand piano, takes a deep breath, and plays a piece so magnificent it leaves the entire room speechless. Claire Harper's fingers danced over the worn keys of the upright piano in her modest San Francisco apartment. Early morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a warm glow over the small living room. At 35, Claire's auburn curls framed a face that carried both gentleness and determination in equal measure. She finished Chopin's Nocturne with a delicate flourish, then glanced at her watch. Already 8:30. She'd be late for work again. "Every single time," she muttered, closing the piano lid reluctantly. Claire's apartment sat in one of the older neighborhoods in San Francisco, where Victorian houses had been divided into affordable units. It wasn't much, but the landlord had allowed her to keep the old piano, which was all that mattered. She rushed to change from her comfortable home clothes into her uniform, the simple beige cardigan and black slacks required for her job at the Fillmore Music School, where she taught beginner piano to children. It wasn't the prestigious concert career she'd once dreamed of, but it kept her connected to music. 20 years ago, Claire had been a prodigy, trained at the San Francisco Conservatory, destined for greatness. The daughter of a single mother who had sacrificed everything for her daughter's education, Claire had been on track to become one of the greats. But then life happened. Her mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, and the difficult choice to pause her studies to care for the woman who had given her everything. By the time her mother passed away, Claire's savings were gone, and the momentum of her early career had dissipated. "Music is still music," her mother had told her in those final days. "Whether you play at Carnegie Hall or in our living room, it's what's in your heart that matters." Claire had carried those words with her, finding joy in teaching children, playing at small community events, and occasionally at the local church. The elite classical world that had once been within her reach now seemed a lifetime away. Outside, the San Francisco fog was beginning to burn off as Claire hurried down the street, coffee in hand. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, her closest friend since childhood. "Don't forget about tonight. Symphony fundraiser. I got you that catering gig. Good money plus free access to the event. Wear something nice." Claire had almost forgotten. Sarah worked as an event coordinator for the San Francisco Symphony and had pulled strings to get Claire a job serving at tonight's exclusive fundraiser. The extra money would help with this month's rent. As she rode the bus to the music school, Claire thought about what "wear something nice" meant. Her wardrobe consisted mainly of practical, comfortable clothes. The nicest thing she owned was the beige cardigan she was wearing now, paired with her only black dress for special occasions. She sighed, looking out at the city she loved, but could barely afford. San Francisco had changed over the years, becoming increasingly divided between tech wealth and everyone else. The classical music scene had changed too, seeming more about status and connections than the music itself. Claire arrived at the school, greeting her first student with a warm smile, pushing aside thoughts of tonight's event. For now, she would focus on sharing her love of music with 8-year-old Emma, who was just learning to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. "Remember," Claire told her, "music isn't about impressing others. It's about expressing what's in your heart." The Beaux-Arts-style concert hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and gilt moldings. Women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos mingled, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter mixing with the gentle notes from a string quartet in the corner. Claire felt painfully out of place in her simple black dress and beige cardigan as she balanced a tray of canapes. She'd pinned her auburn curls up in an attempt at elegance, but she knew she still looked like what she was, someone who didn't belong. "Remember to smile," the catering manager had instructed. "These people are giving thousands to the symphony tonight." Claire moved through the crowd, offering hors d'oeuvres and trying to blend into the background. Her eyes, however, kept drifting to the magnificent Steinway grand piano positioned at the center of the adjoining recital room. Its polished ebony surface gleamed under the lights, calling to her. "Quite the beast, isn't it?" a voice beside her remarked. Claire turned to find an elderly woman watching her with knowing eyes. "It's beautiful," Claire replied, unable to hide her admiration. "You play?" the woman asked. "I used to. Now I just teach," Claire answered with a small smile. "What a shame," the woman said, her tone genuine. "I'm Eleanor Winters, by the way, board member." "Claire Harper," she responded, surprised at the introduction and just the help tonight. Eleanor chuckled. Music doesn't care about job titles, my dear. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of conservatory students, led by a tall man with perfectly coiffed hair and an air of cultivated superiority. Victor Reynolds, the youngest piano department chair in the San Francisco Conservatory's history and the evening's featured performer. "Ah, Eleanor," he greeted, kissing the elderly woman's cheek. "I've been looking for you. I wanted to discuss the program changes." His eyes briefly landed on Claire, dismissing her instantly as staff. He plucked a canapé from her tray without acknowledging her presence. "Victor, this is Claire Harper," Eleanor said pointedly. "She's a pianist as well." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Professional?" "I teach beginners," Claire answered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Victor smiled thinly. "How charming. Always good to have people introducing the basics to children." One of his students snickered, and Claire fought the urge to shrink into herself. "Not everyone can handle the rigors of true classical training," Victor continued. "It takes a certain caliber of musician." Claire knew she should stay quiet, just nod and move on. But something, perhaps Eleanor's encouraging presence or the dismissive tone in Victor's voice, made her speak. "True musical understanding goes beyond technical training," she said quietly. Victor's smile froze. "Excuse me? I just mean that technique without heart is empty," Claire elaborated, immediately regretting her words. Victor's expression hardened. "An interesting perspective from someone serving appetizers. Tell me, where did you study?" "I was at the conservatory, actually," Claire replied. "Years ago." "Were you?" His tone was laced with doubt. "And yet, here you are. Well, I suppose that illustrates my point perfectly." Eleanor's expression darkened. "Victor, no, it's fine," Claire interjected. "I should get back to work." As she turned to leave, Victor called after her. "You know, we'll be having an impromptu performance session after the formal program. Staff are welcome to observe from the back, if you'd like to see what heart combined with actual skill looks like." Claire could feel the stares of the wealthy patrons, the students, the other staff. She nodded stiffly and moved away, her face burning with humiliation. "Don't let him get to you," Eleanor whispered as she passed. "That man's talent is overshadowed only by his ego." But the damage was done. Claire spent the next hour serving drinks, the weight of Victor's dismissal heavy on her shoulders. The formal portion of the fundraiser concluded with Victor Reynolds performing a technically flawless Liszt piece that earned enthusiastic applause. As the scheduled program ended, the evening transitioned to its more relaxed phase, with guests moving between the reception area and the recital room. Claire was clearing champagne flutes when she overheard Victor holding court near the piano. "The problem with music education today," he was saying to an attentive group of donors, "is that we've lowered our standards. Everyone believes they can be a pianist with a few lessons and passion." He made air quotes around the word. Eleanor Winters stood at the edge of the group, her expression disapproving. When she caught Claire's eye, she gave her an encouraging nod. "What we need is more rigor, more discipline," Victor continued, "like we had in the classical traditions." "Some would argue that rigidity stifles creativity," Eleanor interjected. Victor laughed dismissively. "Creativity without foundation is just noise, Eleanor. You need to master the rules before you can break them." The conversation might have continued along these academic lines had the catering manager not approached Claire at that moment. "We're short on staff for the cleanup. Can you stay an extra hour?" he asked, loudly enough to interrupt the nearby discussion. All eyes turned to Claire. She nodded, acutely aware of the attention. "Ah, our pianist turned server," Victor said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, what was your perspective on Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody? As a former student of the conservatory, surely you have some insight." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. The room seemed to hold its breath as Claire carefully set down her tray. "It was technically perfect," she said. Victor's smile widened. "Thank you." "But it lacked heart," Claire finished quietly. A shocked murmur ran through the assembled guests. Victor's expression darkened. "Heart," he repeated. "That nebulous quality amateurs cling to when they can't master technique." Claire knew she should stop, apologize, and return to work. but something about Victor's smug certainty ignited a spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. "Music isn't just about playing notes correctly," she said. "It's about making them mean something." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Easy to critique from the sidelines, isn't it? Why don't you show us this heart you keep mentioning?" He gestured toward the Steinway, a provocative smile playing on his lips. "I'm working," Claire said, glancing at her catering manager, who looked mortified. "I'm sure your employer would excuse you for a moment of cultural education," Victor pressed. "Unless, of course, you're all talk." Eleanor stepped forward. "Victor, that's enough." But he was on a roll now, playing to the audience. "One piece, your choice. Show us this emotional quality that apparently my playing lacks." The challenge hung in the air. Claire felt trapped, cornered by her own words and Victor's manipulation. She glanced around the room, at the wealthy patrons watching with curious amusement, at Victor's students snickering behind their hands, at Eleanor's concerned expression. "I don't think," Claire began. "Just as I thought," Victor interrupted smoothly. "It's always easier to criticize than to perform. Perhaps stick to teaching chopsticks to children." That did it. The dismissive way he referenced her students, the children who approached music with pure joy and open hearts, broke something loose inside Claire. "One piece," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Victor looked surprised, then pleased, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. "Excellent. Let's see what serving canapés has done for your conservatory training." As Claire moved toward the piano, her catering manager caught her arm. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "You're here to work, not perform." "It'll just take a minute," Claire promised, though she wasn't sure if she'd have a job afterward. The crowd parted, creating a path to the magnificent Steinway. Claire felt every eye on her as she approached, her simple black dress and beige cardigan, standing out starkly against the evening gowns and tuxedos. Standing before the gleaming Steinway, Claire suddenly felt the weight of the moment. What was she doing? She hadn't performed in public for years, certainly not on an instrument of this caliber, and definitely not in front of San Francisco's musical elite. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the bench. This was madness. She should apologize, make an excuse, and go back to serving drinks. One disparaging comment from Victor Reynolds wasn't worth risking her job or subjecting herself to public humiliation. Victor stood nearby, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. He'd orchestrated this perfectly. Either she would refuse and prove his point about amateur critics, or she would play and likely embarrass herself after years away from serious performance. "Any day now," he said, checking his watch with exaggerated patience. Claire's fingers hovered above the keys. What piece should she even play? Her mind raced through possibilities. Something technically impressive to challenge Victor's assumptions. Something emotionally rich to demonstrate her point about heart. A memory surfaced, her mother sitting beside her on their old piano bench, placing her small hands on the keys. "Music is a conversation, Claire. It's not about showing off, it's about saying something true." Claire glanced up and caught Eleanor's encouraging smile from across the room. Beside her stood Sarah, Claire's friend who had gotten her this catering job, looking both worried and curious. "Ms. Harper is having second thoughts, it seems," Victor announced to the room. "Perfectly understandable. Performance anxiety affects many former students." Former students. The words stung. Claire had never stopped being a musician just because life had forced her from the path she'd once imagined. She thought of her students, Emma struggling through her first recital, 6-year-old Marcus beaming with pride after mastering a simple melody, teenagers finding refuge in music during difficult times. She taught them that music was about courage and expression, not perfection. What kind of teacher would she be if she couldn't follow her own advice? Claire straightened her shoulders and placed her hands on the keys. The cool ivory beneath her fingertips felt like coming home. She closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself. "Actually," she said quietly, "I was just deciding what to play." Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised she hadn't backed down. "Something with heart, I presume?" he said, his tone mocking. Claire nodded, a calm settling over her. "Exactly." She took a deep breath, blocking out the murmurs of the crowd, the opulent surroundings, Victor's judgmental stare. In this moment, it was just her and the piano, the relationship that had sustained her through everything. Her hesitation dissolved into resolve. If this was to be her one moment back in the world she'd once belonged to, she would make it count. The room fell silent as Claire's decision crystallized. She would play Debussy's Clair de Lune, not the most technically challenging piece, but one that required sensitivity and emotional depth, one that spoke to her own journey from brightness through shadow and back to light. Victor seemed to read her mind. Something simple, I hope? Perhaps a little Mozart for beginners? His students chuckled, but Claire no longer cared. She positioned her hands, feeling the perfect weight and balance of the Steinway's action, so different from her worn upright at home, or the basic models at the music school where she taught. This instrument could breathe, it could whisper, it could soar. "I'll be playing Debussy," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room. Victor smirked. "Clair de Lune, I presume? A bit cliché, don't you think?" Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to. Instead, she began to play. The first notes emerged, delicate as moonlight on water. Claire felt rather than saw the subtle shift in the room, the slight intake of breath, the suspension of movement. She didn't play the piece as it was typically performed, with romantic sentimentality. Instead, she found her own voice within Debussy's framework, bringing a clarity and emotional honesty that made the familiar piece sound new. As she continued, Claire's initial nervousness melted away. She wasn't playing for Victor or the wealthy patrons, or even for herself. She was playing for her mother, who had sacrificed everything, for her students who found joy in simple melodies, for everyone who had ever felt diminished or dismissed. The music flowed through her, each phrase telling a story of loss and resilience, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. Claire closed her eyes, letting herself be vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed in years. When she reached the piece's climax, her fingers drawing a rich, resonant swell from the piano, she opened her eyes to find the room transformed. The chattering, mingling crowd had gone completely still. Even the servers had paused, trays in hand, listening. Victor's smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression Claire couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly, but something else too. Confusion, perhaps, or the reluctant beginning of reassessment. Eleanor Winters was smiling, her eyes shining with what might have been tears. Beside her, Sarah looked stunned and proud. Claire approached the final, gentle cascade of notes, bringing the piece to its hushed conclusion. In that moment, she made her final decision. She would not end with Debussy. Without pause, she transitioned into Chopin's revolutionary Etude, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire. The sudden shift from Debussy's impressionist delicacy to Chopin's passionate intensity caught everyone by surprise. This was her statement, her declaration, her reclaiming of the identity she had never truly lost. The opening thunderous left-hand passage of Chopin's Etude erupted from Claire's fingers, reverberating through the concert hall with unexpected power. Several guests actually stepped back in surprise at the sudden intensity. This was no longer the unassuming server in a beige cardigan. This was a force of nature. Claire's hands flew across the keyboard with precision and passion that belied her years away from the concert stage. The technical challenges of the piece, the rapid 16th notes, the complex cross rhythms, the demanding left-hand patterns, melted beneath her fingers as if they were the simplest exercises. But it wasn't just technical mastery that held the room spellbound. Claire played with a raw emotional authenticity that transformed Chopin's revolutionary fervor into something deeply personal. Each note carried the weight of her own quiet revolution, against circumstances, against dismissal, against the narrowing of possibility. Victor's students exchanged glances of disbelief. Their teacher had just suggested this woman was an amateur, yet she was performing one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire with a level of skill that matched or exceeded their own. One of them, a young woman who had been particularly disdainful earlier, was now watching Claire's hands with unabashed admiration. As Claire navigated the etude's treacherous middle section, a strand of auburn hair escaped its pin, falling across her face. She didn't brush it away, didn't break her connection with the music. Sweat beaded on her forehead from the physical exertion, but her expression remained serene, almost transported. Victor stood rigid, his arms no longer casually crossed, but hanging at his sides. The color had drained from his face as he watched Claire's fingers execute perfect runs and arpeggios. This wasn't just good playing. This was virtuosic. Eleanor made her way to his side. "Still think she should stick to teaching chopsticks," she murmured, just loudly enough for him to hear. Claire was entirely unaware of these reactions. She had entered that rare state musicians chase their entire careers, where performer and instrument and composition become a single entity, where thought dissolves into pure expression. Her years of teaching had deepened her musicality in ways her younger, more technically obsessed self could never have anticipated. As she approached the piece's conclusion, Claire finally allowed herself to look up. What she saw nearly broke her concentration. Not just the slack-jawed expressions of Victor and his students, but the entire room enthralled. Servers with forgotten trays, donors with untouched champagne, board members leaning forward in their seats, all unified in their attention to her performance. The final chords resounded through the hall with triumphant clarity. Claire released the last note and lifted her hands from the keyboard, the sound lingering in the perfect acoustics of the space. For one heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then the room erupted. Applause crashed like a wave, startling in its suddenness and intensity. People rose to their feet, abandoning any pretense of aristocratic reserve. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the back, setting off a chain of similar exclamations. Claire remained seated at the piano, momentarily stunned by the reaction. She had not played for applause, she had played for truth. But the recognition washing over her now was overwhelming. Through the blur of movement and noise, Claire spotted Eleanor beaming with vindication. Sarah was jumping up and down like they were teenagers again. Even the catering manager stood with his mouth agape, his earlier irritation forgotten. Only Victor remained still amidst the standing ovation, his face a complex map of emotions: shock, disbelief, and something that might almost be respect. Claire stood finely, smoothing her simple black dress, tucking the errant strand of hair behind her ear. She gave a modest bow, unpracticed after so many years away from performance. The applause continued, showing no signs of abating. Claire had not just played the piano, she had shattered every assumption in the room about who she was and what she was capable of. As the applause gradually subsided, Claire found herself surrounded by people who had ignored her all evening. Wealthy patrons who had barely glanced at her while she served hors d'oeuvres now pressed business cards into her hands. Conservatory board members introduced themselves, asking where she had studied, why they hadn't heard of her before. "That was extraordinary," a silver-haired man in an expensive tuxedo told her. "I've heard that piece performed around the world, but never with such authenticity." "Are you currently affiliated with any musical institution?" a woman in diamonds inquired. Claire shook her head, still slightly dazed. "I teach at Fillmore Music School. For children." The woman looked puzzled, as if unable to reconcile Claire's talent with her modest position. Through the crowd, Claire caught sight of Victor. He stood slightly apart, his earlier smugness replaced by a strange stillness. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, tight nod. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. Eleanor appeared at Claire's side, taking her arm protectively. "Give her some space, everyone. Ms. Harper didn't come here to be mobbed." The elderly woman steered Claire toward a quieter corner. "You've been hiding quite the gift, my dear." "Not hiding," Claire corrected gently. "Just living a different life than I'd planned." Eleanor studied her with shrewd eyes. "And has tonight changed that plan?" Before Claire could answer, Victor approached. The crowd parted for him, watching with undisguised interest. "Ms. Harper," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "That was unexpected." Claire waited, neither helping him nor challenging him. "You have a remarkable gift," he continued, "one that deserves proper cultivation. We should discuss your future." He handed her his card. "My office. Tomorrow?" It wasn't quite an apology, but from someone like Victor, it was as close as it might get. Claire looked at the card, then back at him. "I've already cultivated my gift, Mr. Reynolds, but thank you." Her calm rejection left him momentarily speechless. The second time that evening, she'd managed that feat. In the days that followed, Claire's life transformed in unexpected ways. Video of her performance, captured on a donor's phone, went viral in classical music circles. The San Francisco Chronicle ran a feature titled "Hidden Virtuoso, the Server Who Stunned the Symphony." Offers came from concert promoters, conservatories, even record labels. Yet Claire approached this sudden recognition with the same quiet authenticity that had characterized her playing. She accepted a part-time position at the conservatory, teaching advanced students, but kept her job at Fillmore Music School. She agreed to a limited number of performances, including a charity recital to raise funds for music education in underserved communities. When asked by a reporter why she hadn't pursued a professional career earlier, Claire smiled. "Life took me on a different path, but I never stopped being a musician, whether anyone was listening or not." Victor, to his credit, became one of her most vocal supporters, though they maintained a respectful professional distance. 6 months later, Claire performed to a sold-out audience at the same concert hall. In the front row sat her students from Fillmore Music School, their faces shining with pride and possibility. As she took her place at the piano, Claire wore her signature beige cardigan over an elegant black dress, a deliberate reminder of where she'd come from and who she still was. Before beginning, she addressed the audience. "Music isn't about credentials or pedigree. It's about speaking truth through sound. Never let anyone convince you that your voice isn't worth hearing." Then she played, not to impress, but to connect, just as she always had. If Claire's story moved you today, remember that extraordinary talent often hides in plain sight. The person you overlooked might just be the most remarkable individual you'll ever meet. We're curious. Have you ever been underestimated or discovered hidden talents in someone else? Share your story in the comments below. If you're watching from San Francisco, Boston, or anywhere else across America, let us know. Your support helps us continue bringing these inspiring stories to life. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us all to look beyond appearances and recognize the genius that exists in unexpected places. Until next time, remember, true talent never needs to announce itself.